Okay, Acts chapter 7. Now, I have to admit, when I started to look at Acts chapter 7, you start to wonder what it's all about, really, because Stephen has just given an account of really the history of Israel. And you think, well, why is he just running through all this stuff that these people, the Sanhedrin, would know inside out and backwards, probably better than we ever will? And why do they get so ratty at the end that they want to kill him? It's a bit of a strange thing, as you know, he just seems to be recounting the history of the Jewish people. But I think as you look at it and you start to try and get through to what he's thinking about, there's more to it than just Stephen recounting the history of Israel. You know, he's not just rambling on, trying to waste some time or, you know, get himself off the hook like that. You know, it's very easy to forget what's going on when we look at these verses, okay? Because, you know, Stephen is basically in front of a lynch mob. Okay, they've brought him in, and there's all kinds of accusations flying around. If you remember, he's been dragged in on false charges, really. There's, you know, there's various factions have come along. His teachings and his miracles have caught the attention of the Jewish authorities, and these various factions have come along, and they've, you know, got people who come along give trumped up charges against him, saying that he's speaking against the temple and against the law, and that he's basically a renegade Jew. Okay, and it's blasphemy, really. Stephen's on the charge of blasphemy. If you look at chapter 6, verse 13, it says there, they produced false witnesses who testified this fellow never stopped speaking against his holy place and against the law. That was really the false charges that Stephen was called in front of the Sanhedrin for, okay? And this is a delicate area. You know, the law and the temple is a very delicate area with the Jews. You know, that was so sacred. You know, it was something that you didn't really touch. The temple was of great importance, okay? Not just because of its architectural beauty. It wasn't just a lovely building or something like that, but it was because, you know, to the Jews, God had promised that to them, they believed that God had promised his presence was there with them. It was a sign of God being with them all the time, that he'd put his name there and his people were there. And so for them, they didn't ever sort of challenge anything about that. I'll just put some references down here to look at, and they're all in the Psalms. So if you've got your Bible, let's just look at three Psalms that sort of go back to how people venerated the temple, really. If we go to Psalm 27, I think these are all verses that we probably know. But Psalm 27, verse 4, it says there, "One thing I ask of the Lord, this is what I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple." You see the reverence, how they felt about the temple. Psalm 84, verse 1. If I can find it. Psalm 84, verse 1. Psalm 84, verse 1. "How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord Almighty." Okay, that's the temple as far as they're concerned. That's how they talked about it. That's how they thought about it. Verse 10 in Psalm 84 says, "Better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of the Lord than dwell in the tents of the wicked." So special is the temple. And Psalm 122, verse 1. 122, verse 1. "Look, I rejoice with those who said to me, 'Let us go to the house of the Lord.'" And these are verses that we all know. There's hymns about them, isn't there? You know, we know them, and this is really what the Jews would think, right? What happened that had made these accusations so severe was that the Jews had become to believe, right, that God actually dwelt in the temple. They believed he was there, living in the temple. It was his home. It was his house. The temple and its existence sort of guaranteed that God was with the Jewish people, okay? They were guaranteed of his protection. Remember, we've been thinking about the ark going into battle. And when the ark was captured, the glory of the Lord has departed from Israel. And they actually sort of transferred this sort of feeling to the temple, really, that as long as the temple was there, God was with them on their side, and they were okay. You know, its destruction would mean that God has left them. It's exactly how it was when the ark was captured. And actually, you know, if you read sort of Jeremiah 7 verse 4, the prophets spoke out against this kind of thing, you know, that the people were feeling like that. Jeremiah said, you can't just keep sort of saying the temple, the temple, the temple. It's not what it's all about, you know. There's more to it than that, you know. So it was not just that, you know, the temple was so special. There's something else going on here with Stephen when he's talking about this, all right? So it's along these lines that Stephen begins to make this speech, which goes on for quite a while, really, and most of it is, you know, goes through the whole of the chapter. Stephen's point is that long before the temple was built, okay, Israel's forefathers, Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, and that, they never ever imagined that God was imprisoned in a building. They never ever thought of God like that, okay? So what Stephen tries to do is, you go through these verses, if you actually read them through and think about it, okay, he picks out 4 major events that are led up by 4 major characters of the Jewish ancestry, you know, the Jewish nation, okay? The events are dominated by these 4 people. And the first one that he highlights is Abraham, okay? He originated, or he was the beginning of the age of the patriarchs, okay? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 sons. He was the first of the patriarchs, right? Then he goes on to Joseph and the exile in Egypt while they're there. Then he comes on to Moses, who led them out of Egypt and through the wilderness and was given the law. And after that, he comes on to David and Solomon, okay, and the period of the kingdom, okay. But what connects all of these 4 episodes together, the people and the places, is that none of them, not one of them, right, was God's presence limited to one place. Okay, none of them sort of said that God is here or God is there. God was everywhere. Okay, we have to understand that. Stephen's point is that God is everywhere. Okay, he's omnipresent. As Christians, we tend to believe that more in a more understandable way. We just accept it rather than the way that the Jews did, because they thought God was the Jews. God was the God of the Jews for them alone. That was very an exclusive kind of belief for them. Whereas we, as Christians, believe it's a worldwide thing. That Jesus died for all the world. That's how, and we think that of Jesus. You know, anybody in the world can be praying at the same time as us, and you know, God hears. We just accept that as a fact, don't we? Okay, but back then it was a bit different. So if we get to we'll just look at chapter 7, verse 1. Then the high priest asked him, "Are these things true?" I don't know if anybody wants to just read the first sort of verse 2 to verse 8. Save my voice a little bit. Anybody okay with that? Go on, Mike, you read it. Or Sinead, anyone, I don't mind.
Then said the high priest, "Are these things so?" And he said, "Men, brethren, and fathers, hearken. The God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham of the Mesopotamia before he dwelt in Haran, and said unto him, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shall show thee. Then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran, and from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him into this land wherein we now dwell. And he gave him none inheritance in it, no, not so much as to set his foot on. Yet he promised that he would give it to him for possession, and to his seed after him, when as yet he had no child. And God spake on this wise, that his seed should sojourn in a strange land, and that they should bring them into bondage, and entreat them evil 400 years. And the nation to whom they should be in bondage will I judge, said God, and after that shall they come forth and serve me in this place. And he gave him the covenant of circumcision, as though Abraham begat Isaac, and circumcised him that day, and Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat the patriarchs.
Yeah, so it seems like you're just going through the history of Israel. But Stephen has got a point here, you see. You know, if you just read this on the face, I think, well, yeah, this is all that we know, right? But, you know, I like the bit where he starts off in his address in verse 2, the God of glory appeared, right? Okay, because I think that reflects on actually verse 55 later on in the chapter, okay, as he's about to be stoned, right? It says that in verse 55, but Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, looked up to heaven and saw the God of glory Okay, there's a sort of a, Luke brings those two references together, and I think for Stephen that must have been, well, I'm not saying a marvellous moment as he's being stoned, but you know what I mean, you know, within his spirit, it must have been a huge moment, really, mustn't it? But you know, in Joshua 24:2, we read that the family of Abraham were idolaters. They worshipped idols, okay? And Stephen makes it clear that it was God who acted in these verses. It was God who moved, okay? God who called Abraham's family, okay? God who spoke. It was God who called, God who sent. It was God who protected them as they come out of Ur and they travel. They've got to travel to Canaan, don't forget. Okay. In actual fact, if you study the passage of Abraham, he comes out of the Chaldees, he comes into Canaan, he goes to Egypt, he comes back to Canaan. Don't forget, Canaan's the promised land. But God is guiding and leading all the way in these countries, okay, all these different places. God was always with Abraham, you know, right down to his grandsons. God is with them in all their journeyings, in all their ups and downs, right? He's directing them and calling them to be wherever he wanted to be. And Stephen says they go down into Egypt, okay? They're going to be in bondage there for 400 years. He talks all about this. And so he then moves on to Joseph, which is the next part of the history, really, because, you know, he's the next one who comes along. So if we just read verses 9 to 16, I'll read that bit, and then Mike can read a bit, and somebody else can read a bit, okay? Because the patriarchs were jealous of Joseph, they sold him as a slave into Egypt, but God was with him and rescued him for all his troubles. He gave Joseph wisdom and enabled him to gain the goodwill of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So he made him a ruler over Egypt and all his palace. Then a famine struck all Egypt and Canaan, bringing great suffering, and our fathers could not find food. When Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent our fathers on their first visit. On their second visit, Joseph told his brothers who he was. And Pharaoh learned about Joseph's family. And Joseph sent for his father Jacob, and his whole family, 75 in all. Then Jacob went down to Egypt, where he and our fathers died. Their bodies were brought back to Shechem and placed in the tomb that Abraham had bought from the sons of Hamor in Shechem for a certain sum of money. Okay, so Mesopotamia was the surprising place where God called Abraham's family, okay, miles away from Jerusalem, okay. You know, it was a distant place. But then the next thing we read is God speaks in another strange place, really. Where is Joseph? He's in Egypt. And Egypt is a symbol of the world all through the Old Testament. He's not in the Holy Land. He's in Egypt, okay? And God is dealing with Joseph in Egypt. So that's, you know, we've got Mesopotamia. Now we've got Egypt. And Stephen, actually, if you go through this, I think Stephen mentions 6 times Egypt, just to emphasise the fact that it wasn't in Canaan, it wasn't in the Holy Land, it wasn't in the Promised Land, but it was in the worst place ever, because all the while, through the Old Testament, they're told, never go back to Egypt, never go back to Egypt. But that's where God dealt with Joseph, isn't it? It's in countries where these people, these patriarchs, they were in temporary residence. They were not in a land of their own. They were just, you know, sojourners there, as the Bible puts. They were just travelling through. It was not their fixed address. So, you know, these are the heroes of Judaism. They don't live in this place. God is dealing with them there. Joseph was a foreigner and he was a slave in Egypt, okay? But God was with him while he was there. Not only was God with Joseph, but he was with all of Joseph's family. Right, you know, the brothers and the father, they all come there. God is with them. He's got a place provided for them, and they all survive the famine. And it's all part of God's plan outside of the Holy Land, okay? What's all this all about then? Because, you see, Stephen's on trial because they say he's speaking against the holy place, against the temple. Stephen's point is, well, hang on, where is the holy place anyhow, okay? It's not just the temple in Jerusalem. You know, so if somebody else can just read verses 17 to 43. It's quite a long one. Anybody? Yep.
When the time of the promise drew nigh, do you want me to read from your Bible?
That's fine. We can follow it.
But when the time of the promise drew nigh, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt, till another king arose which knew not Joseph. The same dealt subtly with our kindred, and evil entreated our fathers, so they cast out their young children to the end that they might not live. which time Moses was born and was exceedingly fair and nourished up in his father's house 3 months. And when he was cast out, Pharaoh's daughter took him up and nourished him for her own son. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and in deeds. And when he was full 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended him, and avenged him that was oppressed, and smote the Egyptian. For he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God, by his hand, would deliver them, but they understood not. And the next day he showed himself unto them as they strove, and would have set them at one again, saying, Sirs, ye are brethren, why do you wrong one another? But he that did his neighbour wrong thrust him away, saying, Who made thee a ruler and judge over us? Wilt thou kill me, as thou didst the Egyptian yesterday? Then fled Moses at this saying, and was a stranger in the land of Madian, where he begat 2 sons. And when 40 years were expired, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in a flame of fire in a bush. When Moses saw it, he wondered at the sight. And as he drew near to behold it, the voice of the Lord came unto him, saying, I am the God of thy fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Then Moses trembled and durst not behold him. Then said the Lord to him, Put off thy shoes from thy feet, for the place where thou standest is holy ground. I have seen the affliction of my people which is in Egypt, and I have heard their groaning, and am come down to deliver them. And now come, I will send thee into Egypt. This Moses, whom they refused, saying, Whom we made thee a ruler and a judge, the same did God send to be a ruler and a deliverer by the hand of the angel which appeared to him in the bush. He brought them out. After that, he had showed wonders and signs in the land of Egypt, and in the Red Sea, and in the wilderness 40 years. This is that Moses, which said unto the children of Israel, A prophet shall the Lord your God raise up unto you of your brethren, like unto me, him shall ye hear. This is he that was in the church in the wilderness, with the angel which spoke to him in the Mount Sinai, and with our fathers who received the lively oracles to give unto us, to whom our fathers would not obey, but thrust him from them, and in their hearts turned back again into Egypt, saying unto Aaron, Make us gods to go before us. For as for this Moses, which brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we wot not what is become of him. And they made a calf in those days, and offered a sacrifice unto the idol, and rejoiced in the works of their own hands. Then God turned, and gave them up to worship the host of heaven. As it is written in the book of the prophets, O ye house of Israel, have ye offered to me slain beasts and sacrifices by the space of 40 years in the wilderness? Yea, ye took up the tabernacle of Moloch, and the star of your god Remphan, figures which ye made to worship them, and I will carry you away beyond Babylon.
Yeah, so you see how Stephen is going through the history that they would all know, okay? But he's got a real point here, and he spends extra time on Moses, okay? Because there's a lot more verses here about Moses, right? Because, you know, he's shown his respect for Moses in many ways, that Moses was a mighty man, and, you know, that he was used mightily of God, okay? And don't forget, he's been accused of neglect or speaking against the law, okay, abusing the law really given by Moses, okay, and here it is that we find the main thrust of his argument really, and it's in verse 33, okay, because look what he says in verse 33. The Lord said to him, Take off your sandals, the place where you are standing is holy ground. Where is he? He's in Midian, okay. So you see again, he's saying, well, you know, it's not all about the temple in Jerusalem, okay, because later on he makes his point a bit clearer. But so it's about, you know, he's emphasising all the while how Moses was involved in the history of Israel. But from studying Moses, we see that, you know, it's not necessarily just have to be the temple that is holy ground. You know, there was holy ground outside the holy land, okay. And just look at verses 35. Look what he says there. He He says, this is the same Moses whom they had rejected, with the words, who made you ruler and judge, right? He was sent to be their ruler and deliverer by God himself through the angel who appeared to him in the bush. Okay? But they rejected him. Okay? Verse 37. This is that Moses who told the Israelites, God will send you a prophet like me from your own people. This is exactly the claim that Stephen is making. Verse 39. But our fathers refused to obey him. Instead, they rejected him and in their hearts turned back to Egypt. And verse 51. You stiff-necked people with uncircumcised heart and ears, you are just like your fathers. You always resist the Holy Spirit. Do you see where he's heading with all of this, right? He's actually turning everything against them. But he's using Moses, and he's using the law, and he's using the holy place to show them their error. Okay? Stephen traced the life, he traced the ministry of Moses through Egypt, through Midian, through the wilderness, right? And he gives, and he says, you know, God is with him all the way. God is with him every step of the way. And guess what? There's no mention of sacrifices being made. There's no mention of a temple. You know, as I say, in fact, that the holy ground mentioned at the burning bush is far more wonderful than the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem, because God appeared at the burning bush, but he never appeared at the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem. But it's in the land of Midian, in the back of the wilderness. You know, so Stephen's point is that, you know, far from what he's being accused of, we can see from the life of Moses that God is present everywhere. Okay, God is present everywhere. And that the holy place is wherever God is. It's not where in one little spot, okay, as they were thinking of Jerusalem. So I don't know how you think of that. You know, do you see that God is everywhere? Is that, you know, it's not just in the church or in the cathedral or in a synagogue or the Vatican or whatever. He's everywhere. So, are some places on earth more holy than others? We talk about going to a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Is it more holy than anywhere else? Is it any more holy than anywhere else? You know, anywhere else that God has made?
Well, we are the temple.
Yeah.
Of the Holy Spirit. We are.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
God is. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, if you're asking us, which I take it you are.
Yeah.
You're not butting in.
No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, what do you think?
The thing is that when people do a pilgrimage and they come together, it's because they want to be with one another. They want to come to a place where they can join together. That's the idea originally. But what man did, as you can see in the Old Testament and New, they make it holy shrines.
Yeah.
It becomes religion.
Yeah, that's right.
Rather than people joining together in true worship.
Yeah.
Because we are the church.
Yeah,
We are the
that's right. Yeah, no, that's basically what I've written a little later, you know.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. That's great. I'm glad that you brought that out, because, you know, we can sort of make, well, people have all down the centuries made places, you know, to go there and you'll find God there. But that's not true. You can find God in the prison cell. You can find God in your bedroom. You can find God wherever you are, because he is everywhere. But I suppose, being what we are, we tend to sort of have a sense of a special feeling in different places. I don't know what that is, you know, but I think God is wherever we are. If we belong to him, wherever we are, God is, you know. So we have to be careful about saying that God is in church or God is over there. You know, he's not. He's everywhere with us, and he's with us all the while. And that's the promise we've got, isn't it? Wherever you are, I'll be with you. Good. I'm glad somebody says that. Right. Verse 44. Let's just read this. I know this is a long chapter, but it's all part of the same thing. I know we'd normally been doing just a few verses at a time, but this is all part of the same sort of bit today. So 44 to 50, okay? Our forefathers had the tabernacle of the testimony with them in the desert. Okay, it had been made as God directed Moses according to the pattern he had seen. Having received the tabernacle, our fathers under Joshua brought it with them when they took the land from the nations. God drove out before them. It remained in the land until the time of David, who enjoyed God's favour and asked that he might provide a dwelling place for the God of Jacob. But it was Solomon who built the house for him. However, the Most High does not live in houses made by men, as the prophet says. Heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. What kind of house will you build for me, says the Lord? Or where will my resting place be? Has not my hand made all of these things? See, so he goes on to talk about the tabernacle now and the temple, right? And Stephen hasn't got a problem with them. He's not saying there's anything wrong with them, right? They were both right and proper. The instructions of how to build them were given by God, right? What he's saying that neither of these, the tabernacle or the temple, should have been looked on as God's home. That's not God's home. Okay, that was a place for them to come and meet and to worship God, but it's not the place where God lived. That's the place where God said, you know, come and worship me there, but not that this is where I'm going to be and I'm locked in here. Okay, if we just look at 1 Kings 8:27, this is when I think it's 1 Kings 8:27. Solomon had built the temple, and it's the dedication of the temple, right? He's just built this wonderful, splendid temple, okay? And Solomon says this as he's going through his sort of dedication, but will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built? So they had that understanding right back there when it was built, when the first temple was dedicated. And yet in their minds, they transformed it and changed it into something else. And this is the whole of Stephen's thrust, really. You know, this is what he's on trial for, really. That he's spoken against the temple and against the law. So we can see what Stephen is, you know, saying. Don't forget, as I say, he's on trial. He's there for his life, right? There's a single thought that runs through all of this, and he said, you know, it's this, that the God of Israel is not restricted to any one place. Okay, the God of glory appeared in heathen Mesopotamia. He appeared in Egypt. He appeared in Midian, and he appeared in the wilderness. Okay, God does not live in buildings constructed by men. He doesn't do that. Okay, if he has a home on earth, right, then it's with the people who serve and love him. That's where his home is. Okay, with each of us in our hearts. Okay, those who love and serve him faithfully, that's where God makes his home. Wherever they are, he is, and that's the truth of it. This is what Stephen's point is. But, you know, Stephen faced 2 accusations. The second was that he spoke against the law, not just the place of worship. He spoke against the law. And the response to that is really much the same. You know, his argument is that he is more scripturally correct than they are. You know, they've said, you've spoken against the law. But he says, no, I'm more accurate to the scriptures than you are, really. And that the scriptures teach more about the law than the temple. There's more concerning God's law, which is God's heart, really, the law, than there is about the temple there. But here he turns the tables on his judges, you see, those who are judging him. He maintains it's not them it's not him who's had a disregard for the law. In fact, it's them. They're the ones who've disregarded the law, right? And they're following in the footsteps of their forefathers or their fathers. On the other hand, Stephen's respect for Moses and the law is without doubt. You can see by what he says. He knows it, he learns it, he knows what he's talking about. Okay, God directed Moses' early years. He says this in verses 20 to 22. Just look at them. You know, Moses' call came directly from God in verses 31 and 32. His appointment as Israel's leader and Israel's deliverer was made by God himself. Okay, in verse 35, and from the same God he received the words to pass on to the people, you know, that God gave him the words to speak, okay? But what happens, there's a shocking disrespect for Moses by the elders of Israel right back there. Moses was, you know, they want to do away with him. You know, that as Moses the lawgiver, it was not respected, right? And, you know, the shocking disrespect which Moses received didn't come from Stephen. It came from the Jewish people, their leaders, right back there, right? The Jews who failed to recognise Moses as their heaven-sent deliverer. He says that in verse 25. They pushed Moses aside, verse 27. They rejected his authority in verse 35, right? And they refused to obey him and became idolaters in verses 39 and 40. And he goes on to say, and it was just the same with all the other prophets in verses 42 to 43. This is how you was with all of them. You're the ones who disrespect the law. You're the disrespectful ones. And so he exposes all of Israel's past, you know, and the unfaithfulness to the law and to the prophets. And Stephen accuses them. He said, you're following exactly the same path. You're doing exactly what they did. You accuse me, but you're doing just what your forefathers did. You're going down the same route. And then we just go into verses 51 to 53. I know time's going on. He says, you stiff-necked people with uncircumcised heart and ears, you are just like your fathers. You always resist the Holy Spirit. Was there ever a prophet your fathers did not persecute? They even killed those who predicted the coming of the righteous one. And now you have betrayed and murdered him. You who have received the law that was put into effect through angels, but you haven't obeyed it. You've disregarded it. He says they're stiff-necked, right? They're stubborn, right? And both the, at both the words of Moses and the prophets, right? They refuse to listen to that. And he says you've got uncircumcised heart and ears. In other words, you're deaf. You're deaf to what's being said to you. You won't let your hearts respond to it, and you refuse to hear it. And we'll probably go on to what happened. We can see what happens, right? It has a fantastic or incredibly horrible effect on them. But that sort of heads up the next bit. But on hearing this, I think they're cut to the heart. It really strikes home what Stephen is saying to them. Look, it says when they heard this, they were furious and gnashed their teeth at him. Why? Because he's told them the truth, and it's cut them to the core, cut them to the quick. And so we'll look at that next time. But if you can see that chapter that sort of goes on and seems to ramble through the history of Israel, he's actually making a point to defend himself, saying that you're following in the footsteps of your parents. You're disregarding the law. You don't understand what the temple's about, yet you're making that accusation against men. So I believe the Holy Spirit helped Stephen to make that defence. Sorry it's a bit long this week, but that was a lot to get through, but it's all part of that one bit.